Welcome to our session here today. We're talking about progressive decoupling with React, Drupal, and Apache Solr. On the schedule, we had like a more verbose title that we decided to trim down. So if you're here for build a powerful, highly performant search application with React, Apache Solr, and Drupal, you're in the right place. So thank you so much for coming. This first session of Asheville, Drupal Camp Asheville. We may be Kevin's 1000th recording. He's been doing all the camps and cons for a while, and somewhere in this first session will have been his 1000th recording. So big ups to Kevin, and maybe it'll be us or somebody else, and we'll be $9.99 or whatever. So yeah, as mentioned here at Drupal Camp Asheville, we are coming. Savas is rooted in Durham, North Carolina, a few hours east of here. It's good to see some Durhamites in here, as well as some folks who've traveled a little farther away. Come on in, y'all.
Yeah, I'll set up some chairs.
Welcoming at any time. I think there's one more here. One chair here. We don't want to lose you, Adam.
I got nothing to love.
All right, catch you later. Yeah, so just a quick introduction to Savas. Dan and I are here representing Savas. I'm the founder. Dan is a web developer at Savas. This is our first time sponsoring Drupal Camp Asheville, so we're pretty proud of that. And we have, thank you, appreciate it. Wasn't begging for an applause there or anything. We have presented a few years back, but haven't been back in a few years. So, and what we do at Savas, similar to probably what a lot of Drupal agencies here do. We like to talk about building web systems and not just websites. I think this talk that we're giving today is a good example of integrating with different technologies and frankly with this client, different back-end systems. So that's a lot of the kind of work that we end up doing. Of course, Drupal is kind of the foundation that these systems are interacting with. Just a quick shout out, we are hiring, looking to grow designers, a marketer, and Drupal engineers. So if there are folks in your network, please contact me. You know how to get hold of us through Twitter. Chris at Savas Labs is my email. So please reach out that way. Very quick, Dan told me to make this part quick because we don't have enough time. Just who am I? I've been doing Drupal for 11 years. In many ways, I'm still figuring out who am I. Maybe some of y'all can relate to that as well, who I am. In my first Drupal job, I was kind of thrown into a bunch of things I wasn't prepared for, but I learned a lot in that process, made a lot of mistakes, did a lot of growing. And then I, about a year in, abruptly decided that I wanted to ride my bicycle across the country for various reasons we won't get into now. But that was my trip. Those different colors on the map represent different days, and if anyone's interested about that journey, I have a blog written up about it I can share with you later. But definitely something that I kind of carried forward, big impact on my life and my career at this point. At the end of that trip, I moved to Boston, where I met many wonderful people, among which Mr. Dan Murphy, who will be doing the actual brunt of this presentation, and I also worked for a Drupal agency there for a little over a year, Isovera. So had a few years of working for another agency. And then after that, I moved to Durham, North Carolina, which I'm sorry, this is the best picture. Frankly, there's a new build, Durham's growing fast like a lot of cities, and there's new buildings that aren't even in this picture. But moved to Durham and then kind of started freelancing. And in addition to freelancing, being inspired by that bike journey, started a bicycle-powered compost service called Tilthy Rich Compost. So that was kind of another little chapter of my life. And what you're looking at here is a trailer that a friend helped make me build out of a futon. And we carried around the buckets and exchanged people's compost for soil at their households. And so ran that for 5 years, and then eventually joined with another company, and that was kind of a similar time. There was some overlap with when I started Savas and when I sold Tilthy Rich Compost, but the compost company is doing very well on its own, and now able to focus more on Savas. I always like to say, kind of Tilthy Rich merged three of my passions: biking, environmentalism, and puns. And every once in a while when I look at it, it's like sad to let it go. But those are the kinds of things that are important to me. If you're using Drupal to do good work in the world or not, I'd love to talk to you about that afterwards. Now is probably not the best time; it'd be a little awkward. And I still bike a bunch today. This is me going to Drupal Camp Orlando, getting ready to hop on the train. Same train Laurel, you and I took to DrupalCon. And that's it. I think that's enough about me, and I'll pass off to you, Dan.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll give my little brief intro about myself as well. As Chris pointed out, I'm from Boston. Chris and I met when he was in Boston, and now I work with him and been doing Drupal development for several years. My passions include rock climbing and running and biking as well. It's one of the things we share. So if you want to reach out or see us around later today and any of these passions you want to chat about or just this project, those are good icebreakers for us. So today's session, as Chris alluded to, had a long title, but the goal when I was putting together these slides is that I was thinking about who's going to be here. And most of you have Drupal websites or work on Drupal websites, and you're looking for ways you can improve your user experience or make your site better. So one thing I wanted to start with was I wanted to poll the audience and just get a sense of how many of you have worked on sites that use Apache Solr search for the backend. Okay, so most of you. And then how many of you have done any sort of React development at this point? Okay, so a smaller subset. Okay, good. That's good to know as I'm giving this talk. I'm going to start at a high level and sort of give you an overview of the final product so you can see what the app was. And then I'm going to go into more and more detail on how we built that app and hopefully give you some insight along the way in case you're inspired to do it yourself, something similar or something else progressively decoupled. And I'm excited about this project because it was really exciting to work with my team on this one. We were able to collaborate and work in parallel, leverage a lot of our different experiences, and ultimately the client was very pleased with the app that we delivered. So this is a presentation on a case study on the app. I want to give you a little background on the client, Omega, which because I think that drives some of the decision process that we made when we were developing this. Omega is a nonprofit. They're located in upstate New York in Rhinebeck, and they primarily run educational retreats. They've grown over the ages. It was almost always on-campus workshops. Now they do recorded sessions. They offer online workshops. They're trying to grow their paid membership to help fund them, so users can become members and they have access to certain content, they have access to certain discounts. So Omega is sort of growing into the digital age, and they have a Drupal 7 site, which I want to point out, this is a Drupal 7 site that we built on. And they're trying to grow their digital presence, essentially. And they're trying to engage with their users in better and more unique ways. And what they have found is that a lot of their users come to their site looking for various different things, the in-person workshops, the online workshops, articles. And the way the site was working, they were having trouble finding it. So they decided that the search was the primary gateway for most users to the site, and they really wanted to focus on that and improving that experience for end users. And they also wanted to develop it in a way that was somewhat future-proof so that when they upgrade to Drupal 8, which is part of their plans, they'll be able to reuse a fair amount of the code. So that was something else that we considered when we were developing on this. A little insight into the prior search. They already had Solr set up, so that was one of the nice things for this project. And they were presenting the results in a view. This was the view page. I sort of cut and paste the top and the bottom. There were more results in between. But a typical results page, you can browse down, and then when you want to see more, you hit the second, next or whatever, and you can go to different pages. But not the most easy to use navigation. So now I want to do a live demo of the current search so you can see what the end product was and how different it is from there. So I'm going to give a live demo, which is usually advised against in live presentations, so fingers crossed on that. That's why we have it in this presentation mode. I have to find my cursor, which I believe is in the other window, which is the opposite of what I see here. Anyone see it over here?
Yeah.
There it is. Okay. All right, so this is, if you go to Omega Search, this is the page that comes up. I'll refresh it so you can see that loads pretty quickly. And I'm going to walk through the different filters here as I go. I'm going to come back to the search bar here. But if you click on any of the content types, the search results populate pretty quickly. You can have several results. You can clear all to get rid of those. And what you're seeing is the page isn't reloading. The results are reloading. So very dynamic, very reactive. We have workshop dates filter, which will also do it. So let's say we're only interested in workshops from now to the end of the month, and we get workshops. And when I talk about the React component of this, this filter is only for workshops, so when you set the dates, it automatically sets your content types to workshops. So you may have noticed how that highlighted as well. And we can clear that, and that'll clear both of them. As I mentioned, they're primarily located in Rhinebeck, New York, but they also have campuses in New York and Costa Rica that they run during the year. So if you want to filter by that, you can choose those types of workshops as well. And as I said, those are workshops as well, so they automatically populate the content types.
How many total things is it searching for?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I could answer that after. Do you have a sense?
Hundreds, thousands?
More on the thousands, yeah. They have a lot of content.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then so the topics is actually tags. So you could click on the body, and that's content with the body tag, body, mind, and spirit tag. Healthy living, you can X them out here. You can dive deeper. And I'll talk about how we pull in these taxonomy terms as well into the sidebar here. And teachers are getting populated. I'll show how we populate that. Key initiatives as well. As I told you, they're doing a membership push, so certain content is flagged for members, and that will load the for-member results. I'm going to reset everything here really quickly. And just like the results refresh dynamically, loading more is really dynamic too and really fast. So if you want to see more, you can click to show more. So you're getting a sense, I hope, that it's really responsive, and you don't have to wait for the page to reload at all, which is really nice. Another aspect of it is it's a responsive design, so if the browser window gets narrower, let me see if I can get this. It'll eventually drop down to 2 columns, and then if it's a mobile one, the search options will be hidden, and you can reveal those or show those. So responsive design. And there were a couple more things I just wanted to go over real quick, was the search box. So this, when I talk about how we built it, this has a little bit more complexity. That's why I'm circling back to this one. But they have a lot of instructors who have difficult to spell names, so autocomplete spelling suggestion was really important to them. A real basic one might be like yoga, right? And autocomplete to yoga. One of their popular instructors is this woman named Pema, and it's spelled with 1 M, but sometimes people search for 2 M's, and it'll suggest the actual name. And if we hit enter, then we'll see Pema is one of the first results. If we click on Pema, well, one thing I want to note as well is these are updated in the query parameters at the top. So like if somebody bookmarks it or shares a search result link, that shows up as well. Or if somebody searches in the search bar for Pema, then it'll reload the page with that already populated in that value. It's different search results because I didn't have the people filter selected when I searched up here. And one last thing. So if we click on this, the end URL that you'll find is that there's a bunch of query parameters, tags. We are actually tracking what people click on because we wanted to. It's very important to Mega to know what people are searching for, and essentially if they start in the search, if they convert. So that was another factor that went into this, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. But just wanted to share that as part of the demo. So I think that covered everything I wanted to demo, which went pretty well. So as Chris wanted to get a round of applause for a live demo working.
That's the best version of it I've seen.
Yeah, I did a couple of dry runs. So the client, when we delivered this, one of the good quotes that we got back from them was in the email, 5 seconds in, I can already tell it's 1,000 times better. They were really, really pleased with the result, which I was very proud of as well. So now I want to get into the details, how you could build something similar in Drupal leveraging React or other front-end frameworks. And before I get into the details, I want to make sure we're all on a similar page when it comes to the lingo. So traditional Drupal fetches data from the database, returns the full page. You hear probably a lot of people talking about decoupled or headless Drupal these days. And pure decoupling is Drupal is your data provider, and you have all these data consumers, which fetch data from Drupal from a REST endpoint using JSON API or GraphQL. And you might have another Drupal site, or a smartphone app, or a television app, or Alexa. And all of those are fetching data from your content store, your Drupal content store. So your data provider. Progressively decoupled is a slightly different beast. It's a bit more simple in some ways, but it differs from traditional Drupal. And as I mentioned, Drupal returns the entire page, renders the entire page. But with progressively decoupling, we let Drupal do the heavy lifting, and then use potentially like a front-end framework in order to render discrete parts of the site. So Drupal in this scenario would render most of the page, and then React would communicate directly with Drupal in the back end to an endpoint and render that part of the page dynamically. So Drupal still does a lot out of the box for you in a progressively decoupled app, and you can still take advantage of a whole ecosystem of contributed modules. And I think that's one of the huge benefits of progressively decoupling. You can still get most of the benefits of Drupal, but you can still have that really great user experience. And as I mentioned, the ecosystem of contributed modules is one of the best parts of this, and we leveraged a lot of that in this project. So just talking about search for a minute, because sometimes when I start talking about search, I realize there can be a lot of confusion when it comes to Drupal search and the different options that are available. And Drupal ships with core search. And core search is nice. It stores the index in the database, and it has, you can configure it, but it has limitations when you start to scale, when you have a really big site. So there are limitations to Drupal core search that, bigger sites, and when you want to do more things, you start running into limitations. And that's where the Search API module steps in. And the Search API module provides a framework for easily creating searches on any entity known to Drupal using any kind of search engine. So Apache Solr is one search engine you can use with it. So you have one module, contributed module Search API. On top of that, there's the Search API Solr Search, which is a module that works with Apache Solr, which is what we had as the backend here. And that provides a Solr backend for the Search API. It uses Apache Solr servers for indexing and searching content. It has great performance and is suitable even for large commercial websites, and supports facets and multi-index searches. And other modules that we ended up using on this, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, Search API Pages, and we leverage Search API Autocomplete for the autocomplete feature in this, in sort of a unique way, which I'll demonstrate. One thing I wanted to point out was the Apache Solr search module X'd out. This is another module if you're just searching Google for Drupal Solr search. It was more used a little bit in Drupal 7. It's sort of Search API 1.0, essentially, with Search API Solr search. So I don't recommend using that module, and I'm not even sure there's a Drupal 8 version of that one, whereas Search API does have a Drupal 8 version. So for those, there were some people in here that are a little less familiar with Apache Solr who haven't used it before. Just a quick overview of how that works. So Drupal communicates with the database on cron jobs. It'll push to Apache Solr, which will then store it in an index. And then when Drupal needs to do a search, it talks to Solr, and Solr fetches it from the index. So that's how Drupal is pushing and fetching from the Apache Solr index. And then the browser is communicating directly with Drupal, makes a request to Drupal. Drupal gets the search results from the Apache Solr, renders the page, returns it to the browser. And that's how the prior search worked. Drupal rendered this page and delivered it to the browser. And anytime you click next, or one of those numbers on the bottom, it had to do a whole page reload again. Another request to Drupal, another returning to the browser. So now I want to go through the progressively decoupled architecture, which we ended up implementing for this, and how we implemented it. And this next slide is pretty complex, but I'm going to talk through it. Primarily the red arrows, which are a little different. I should have mentioned when I was from Boston that I will occasionally drop my I's, so I apologize for that. Sola may have been said a couple times already. So the first red arrow over here is Drupal's still pushing to Solr. Drupal's still telling Solr what to index, and Solr is indexing that. So you're still doing configuration in Drupal, telling it what and when to index to Solr. Then Drupal, when you go to /search in the browser, that request is made to Drupal. But I highlighted this in red because Drupal's not returning the whole rendered results. It's returning like a basic skeleton of an HTML page, which I'll show you in the next slide, and the app.js file. And then the app.js file, which was built using React, communicates with this proxy.php file that we have, custom module in the Drupal repository, product group. So the React app, bypassing Drupal entirely, speaks to proxy.php. That PHP file doesn't bootstrap Drupal, which is one of the reasons it's really fast. And it's just doing some basic security checks, making sure that the React app is querying the endpoint that we want on Apache Solr. And then proxy.php sends it to Solr, gets the data back, and React renders it. So that's what's happening when you're clicking on different things. The information is being sent to proxy.php, where some basic security checks are done, and then it sends to Solr, and then comes back and re-renders that component of the page, or whatever the component is that you're developing. So just on that proxy.php, it's restricting the location that it's being posted to. So we have an Omega core and the select path on that. So that's sort of what it's doing. I gave this presentation in Boston, and some people asked, could the app communicate directly with Apache Solr? And it could, but we wanted to have some restrictions in place. So that's why the proxy.php is there, and the box around that, again, is to emphasize that's part of our project, part of our Drupal group. Now, I mentioned that red arrow, what we're delivering. So when you go to eomega.org/search, this is a template file, and it's very, very basic. One of the decisions we made collaboratively with our client was that this search page would not support people that don't have JS. So if you don't have JavaScript, you're going to get a message, sorry, you must enable JavaScript to use the search page. It was a trade-off, conscious decision, but one that the client was comfortable with. And then the app.js is going to attach to that div with that ID. So that's where the rest of the page is built by the app.js file. And during the demo, I talked a little bit about the topics, taxonomy terms, the teachers, the key initiatives, and the user as a paid member. We're actually using preprocessed HTML to add those to the settings, the Drupal settings, so that the JS file has access to those. And then we're just adding the JS to the page. One of the things that we found in early iterations of this was that we weren't passing those topics, the teachers, initially, and we were having React fetch those. but it was a little bit of a performance hit. There was a lot of requests going back and forth. And then we found that just including those initially in the Drupal settings file, so when the app.js has access to those, and app.js has access to whether they're a paid member. So on the Drupal side, this is what we're doing to add the JS to the page. So as I mentioned, when Drupal returns the results, it sends this, and it sends it populates the settings, and it sends the app.js. Now, one added complexity that we introduced for this was the autocomplete feature. And that's why I sort of saved it for last in the demo. And what we ended up doing was we actually had proxy.php bootstrapping Drupal in that scenario. It's still pretty performant. In the demo, I think you noticed like the autocomplete popped up really quickly. But the reason we had to do that was we had several different options for autocomplete. There's a Solr suggester component that you can do on the Solr side and configure that. Or we can make use of the autocomplete module, which is built out of the box. And we started down the path of using Solr suggester. And the more we discussed it with the client and the more we were working on it, we realized we found there wasn't great documentation on that. And our client has a Drupal developer in-house that ultimately we're handing off the project and giving them support on. And he was less familiar with it. Their hosting company was a little less reluctant on managing it and setting it up for them as well. So we decided that we would make use of autocomplete, the autocomplete module. And how that works is the autocomplete module actually provides an endpoint that you can send requests to. And in that request include like the PEM for pen. And you can get the results from Drupal in that scenario. So what we have is autocomplete module enabled and configured, and proxy.php recognizes when it's an autocomplete request. And if it's an autocomplete request, it doesn't go straight to Solr, it goes to the Drupal autocomplete endpoint and gets the results from there. So it's slightly different in that regard.
Quick question.
Yes.
So if you're typing a search in, how do you decide that that's the end of the search and that's actually an autocomplete?
Yeah, let me actually go to that. So like, it's pretty dynamic in that regard that as soon as you type a letter, it's going to send something to, it's going to send, the app recognizes that and sends it and then gets it back. And as I said, it's pretty quick in that regard. So each time there's a change in the state of that text field, it triggers the
So
that.
doing a search just based on pressing return at that point, is that like that's not an autocomplete now?
So the search isn't performed right until you hit the enter button, and then it actually does that. So it doesn't return the whole sets of results. It just returns the autocomplete in that situation. Yeah, that was a good question. Thank you for asking that.
It's obvious now you say it.
Well, I don't know. This is a pretty crazy diagram I have up here. So that was the Drupal side of things and the Apache Solr side of things. But a lot of what you saw was built in React. So I want to go over the React architecture a little bit. And just a disclaimer, I am not our front-end expert. I'm primarily a back-end developer. However, I was able to collaborate on this and build some of the components, which was really exciting to me. It was one of the first React projects that I was involved with. And I found that I really, really enjoyed working with React. I found it pretty straightforward to wrap my head around once I was able to start doing some development. So again, I told you all at the beginning, and it seemed like there was less React experience. So I want to give a bit of an overview of React and the component architecture for here. So in React, you build components, reusable components, and once you build a component, it can be used over and over again. So each of these tiles was considered a component. And then the tile grid was a component that had a bunch of tile components within it. And then the search results was a component which had the tile grid and the see more components. So you're building things and then including those in the bigger components which include them. So think about the a different way. You have the app component, and then within the app component, you have a search filters component and a search results component. Within the search filters component, you have content type filter as a component, workshop date filter, location filter as components. And each of those components is its own file. At least that's how we architected it. So that I was able to work on the content type component while somebody else worked on the location content type component, because somebody else had already built the overarching container for that. So that's really allowed us to work in parallel and have a relatively quick turnaround on this project. The components render differently depending on the properties that are passed in. So in the demo, you may have noticed how the workshop events was highlighted when I did workshop dates. That's because the property that was being passed into it was selected or checked. It's a checkbox actually, so it was being told that it should be checked in that case. So components render depending on the properties that are passed in. And then state of a component may change. So properties and states, if you start reading about React, you're going to find that that terminology comes up a lot and can be somewhat confusing. And the state changes depending on how the user interacts with it. So when you click on the box, the state changes is checked. When you start typing in a text field, the state changes, it has that text in it. On the next slide, I'm going to kind of show how the properties and the state flows so that this is reactive. When you click one thing, something else changes. And again, the app component contains the entire app. And the search, I think I actually mentioned what I was going to mention about the search filters and the search results containing the components within it. And I may come back to this in a second. But we have this sort of flow chart that we built to describe how the data flows within the app. And so state is lifted up. So if somebody clicks on a workshop filter, that state is going to be lifted up into the app. And the state for the entire application is stored there. And once the state changes, the app sets the properties, and React basically handles the rest. So that's how the search results update automatically when you click one thing. You don't have to wire everything together. As long as you're moving your state upwards into the containing app, and then using that app to pass the properties back down to all of the children, when you update one thing, something else will update because the overarching app's properties have changed. So data passed to the child, components via props. Other components may have local state for UI purposes. So that's, I think it's worth just clicking again up here just to sort of show how that might work. So if we clear everything and I set a workshop date of the 5th through the 31st, that state has changed. That state propagates or is lifted up, and then we set the properties which propagate down, which is why that automatically updates. So that's how you can also, that's one of the reasons with React you can build things sort of on a component isolated structure, as long as you're making sure that it responds to the property that's being passed in. Property is sort of like a parameter being passed in. The top level component of this, the app, we made use of the React Solr connector component, which is a component that's a node package that is free and open source. So we actually were able to leverage this on this project, and then we built the components below it. So below the app level components, we built those out. And this component provides access to a Solr server and uses the Solr JSON API. And when we're developing, we just need to make sure the Solr connector, we passed the necessary query parameters, or at least what we're searching for. And that communicates with Solr for us, and then it updates the properties, and that's what propagates down and updates all of the tiles on the right-hand side. So this component provided a lot out of the box for us, which was really useful. So now that I've gone over a lot of this aspects of it, I want to go over some of the challenges, consideration, tips, and some of these I talked through during the slides, but I just wanted to hit on them here. So accessibility, that was something you need to consider when you're writing JSX, which is, so when we built the React app, one of the things I probably should have talked about a little bit more was how we structured the React app. And we used JSX, and we wrote our JavaScript using ES6, and then we used Babel to transpile that to ES5, which is more compatible in various browsers. And we had we used npm to pull in some of the dependencies, such as that other component that I mentioned. Our front-end developer, Anne, wrote some npm scripts so that as you were working on a component, the app.js file was built, and it would watch, sort of like if you've done CSS, compass watch, there was something to watch changes in your component. So, so we're actually using all that to compile into, to build a single app.js file, which isn't in version control. We have all of our components in version control, and then we build the app.js file, which isn't in version control, sort of like, again, like if you use Compass for your CSS and Sass. So again, so if you're using React and writing JSX, you need to be really cognizant of writing semantic HTML, because you're writing out a lot of the HTML while you're doing that. Drupal's really good at handling a lot of semantic HTML. When you start writing your own HTML, you need to be more cognizant of that. I don't have a security bullet up here, but we use proxy.php to provide some limitations. Also, though, anytime you're doing search, you need to be careful about what you're indexing, because if you're indexing things that shouldn't be accessible, some people might have access to it. So just like a flag there. Local development and workflow. We actually ended up using the production Solr endpoint while we were developing, and we talked to a client about this. We set up a separate Solr core, so we weren't actually hitting the production one, but we used the production Solr endpoint, and we thought about setting up Solr locally. We use Docker for development, so Docker for Drupal has a Solr container image. And we thought about that, but for speed, rapid development, we considered the options that would require everyone building the index locally, which takes time, and we were comfortable with this in this scenario, hitting the using production Solr, but like a different index on that. So that was a decision we made, and that ended up, I think, speeding things up a bit. Made sure we're all using the same index. To compare. Oh, this isn't working for me. And it's like, oh, did you index this? It avoids that. Let's see. Oopsie. The autocomplete, we found that was really useful the way we implemented it. Again, adding the JS, including setting Drupal.settings with a bunch of data to pre-populate was really helpful. The analytics side of things, we actually have moved things around based on what we found people were clicking on more. Like the topics, people were using that more than they were using instructors. And hosting. Their site is hosted on one of the managed hosting platforms, Contigix, formerly Blackmesh, which has much more flexibility with how you configure your server than some of the other ones. So if you're building a site using Pantheon or Acquia Cloud, and you're thinking about implementing something like this, there's more Solr restrictions there, and how you can set up Solr and whether you communicate directly with Solr. So if that's your site is hosted by one of those, and you're thinking about implementing this, before you implemented it, I would recommend that you reach out to them and make sure that they can support this, because you might run into some limitations there. And then in terms of best practices, we tried to maintain everything to its own custom module. We tried to have build tools so that we weren't committed in the compiled app.js. Tools like watching the component files JSX, so that if you make a change, you can see it in your browser instantly. And then, So going forward, and sort of a summary, I thought this was a project that sort of leveraged a lot of our experiences and allowed us to work collaboratively, use some new technology, and deliver something that our client was really, really happy with and found. So it was a really positive experience all around. We're starting to think of ways we can progressively decouple other things. There's a lot of interesting things in Drupal right now. Drupal core considering decoupling, viewing logs, and so I'd be interested if other people have exciting ideas on how they can decouple different aspects of their site. If you want to talk later, that would be something I'd be interested in, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there to improve user experience in a similar manner. So with that, we've come to the end of the session. I may have sped through some things that people want to ask questions about, or maybe not have elaborated in some areas as well. So we'll open it up to questions at this time.
So I assume you're also doing some D8 sites now, and if you were to implement this in D8, could you maybe touch on a couple points that you think would be either significantly different or slightly different?
Yeah, no, we've definitely considered that, and we are developing.
Repeat the question.
Oh yeah, the question was, this was built in D7, and if we're building sites in D8 currently, and how we would adapt this to a Drupal 8 site, and any particular pointers there. Yes, we are building Drupal 8 sites at this point in time. I haven't used Apache Solr on a Drupal 8 site, but the modules there are Drupal 8 versions for that. I think the autocomplete might be would be one that would probably require the most changes or re-architecting, but I wouldn't see any in the proxy.php, and the React app is pretty similar. We just need to make sure the template file, that's we might change that up. Although it's just primarily markup, so I don't know if that would actually really have to change at all. But and for the most part, I think this would port very well to D8, although we haven't done it yet. Yeah. Oh.
So can you talk about your team structure? Like, how many people worked on this? What was their role? And did you have some people that were like multi-instrumentalists, or did you have like very specialized people on each part?
Yeah, and if you want to talk to this at all as well, I thought about including our team slides so you can see everyone on our team. What's that?
Repeat the question.
Oh yeah. The question was, could I talk about our team structure and how we divvied up the work, and where certain people focused on primary things and other people focused on other things. Yeah, so we had 4 to 5 people working on this, and this was our primary project at the time, and we turned it on pretty quickly. Month, was it? About that? And we have Anne, who's our front-end expert. She structured the the React part of it. So I wasn't as involved in that. And then once she structured it, though, we were able to sort of run with that. So as I said, I worked on the content type, even though I'm primarily a back-end developer, because I wanted to, and she had, she was able to give us like a quick Skillshare overview on how to build it and provide PR reviews on that aspect of things. Me and another colleague were primarily responsible for making sure that the back-end aspect of it worked, make sure we were delivering the proper markup, the settings, proxy.php file, making sure we were communicating with Apache Solr on that end. And also, my colleague, he was responsible for a lot of making sure Solr, he did a lot of the legwork, making sure this was like feasible up front. So I wasn't involved in the feasibility aspect of it, but I was able to work like directly with it. Yeah. Yes?
You said that the front end kind of component doesn't do bootstrapping, it doesn't run the Drupal bootstrap for performance reasons. Is there any notion of the user context and kind of getting that into the search? If you wanted to do access control.
Yeah, the question was, I mentioned earlier how proxy.php bypasses bootstrapping Drupal, and whether if we want to do some sort of access control in the search results. And actually, we are doing that because we are in here. We're actually checking if the user is a paid member. So that's in the initial page load.
Like on a content.
Yeah, exactly.
Search result level.
Right. So once the initial page loads, we we use that to decide if the user is a paid member, and we don't refresh that again. But we do have the capability now, of checking what the query is or what's being sent. So we could theoretically ping Drupal for that again if we wanted to. Yeah, 2 questions. We'll go with
Okay. So you might not want to repeat this question, but would it be possible to take down the site by like attacking it with the autocomplete, because it would bootstrap Drupal like with each letter, and it just seems like maybe that would be like a vector for attack, or is there some sort of caching on there?
Yeah, no, yeah. I don't know if I have the right answer for that, and I want to double check that before I comment for certain. Yeah, load testing that would probably be a good
I was
stuff.
going to say on that note, there's a really great for Linux boxes a tool called OSEC, OSSEC, and that has a log monitor in it that if it sees a large number of requests of either a certain signature or from a certain IP, it'll auto-conk them.
Right.
And to add to that, I think flood control might pick that up. So there's like a flood table that checks for incoming requests from the same IP.
Okay.
So in the case of autocomplete, they would all be having to come, like you couldn't randomize your IP because you're in a form. So it'd be hard to like enter in one character, wait for the autocomplete to run, refresh the page, enter in a character. I think if like there was a script that was running on a page, but since it is bootstrapped and Drupal, I think flood table would probably like flag that IP. Depending on what threshold you have set that, of course, I think.
Yeah.
That would be my first guess.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. I would be interested in talking through it.
Hey, cool. So yes, my question. I'm actually working on a service right now in the early stages where I'm kind of developing a service where people can create curated search engines.
Mhm.
So I'm starting to work on Apache now. Mostly lately I've been working on the crawler. But just a question from a scaling perspective. I know you said there are on the order of like thousands of items for this one.
Yeah.
Did you see from kind of a bottlenecking perspective, like what areas do you think are most likely to have bottlenecking issues, and then also have you addressed any of those, or which ones do you anticipate having to address in a larger application?
Yeah, the question was about bottleneck issues with. So could you clarify a little bit more on where you're talking about the bottleneck occurring?
So in other words, for setting up an Apache Solr search, we have like the Solr server, Drupal, and then in this case also the React.js app. Do you see any bottleneck issues, and how would you address them?
Yeah, we haven't found that there's been too much of a performance issue on these pages at all yet.
Okay.
One of my colleagues who's more involved in the Google Analytics and like performance side of things as well has been paying more attention to that, and making sure it's delivering on that end. I don't know off the top of my head if you had like millions and millions and millions of pieces of content, like where you'd run into those issues.
Two related questions about the proxy.php script. Does the API, I guess, that you use to query that endpoint, is it just exactly the same as what you'd use to query a Solr endpoint, or did you create like a little API for that?
No, it's a very minimal script. It's like a couple hundred
so
lines.
Just passing Solr stuff.
Yeah.
And because it's a file that's like inside your Drupal code base, does that mean that the results from query, like the results of any URL that includes that, would those get cached by Varnish or something like that?
This site doesn't use Varnish. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if that would be an issue, but if it was, it would. You could probably configure Varnish to ignore those paths.
Well, you might want it to.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. Oh, we are out of time. Sorry. Thank you for the heads up. I'm going to hit the red button here to stop.